The sun was rising slowly above the horizon, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and gold. At a private terminal of an airport, a few people were preparing to board a sleek jet that gleamed like silver under the morning light. Everyone seemed excited, whispering about the comfort of the flight and the luxury that awaited them on board. Among the passengers, a young black woman walked calmly, pulling a simple but stylish suitcase. Her presence was quiet yet graceful. She wore a long coat, elegant but not flashy, and her hair was tied neatly behind her head. To anyone who noticed, she looked like a well-mannered traveler, maybe someone who had been invited as a guest or perhaps an assistant to one of the important passengers. No one knew her true identity, and that was exactly how she wanted it. She had learned in life that sometimes it was better not to reveal everything at once. Her wealth, her position, her success, these were things she carried with dignity, not things she used to demand respect. She believed respect should be natural, not forced. When she approached the boarding gate, she gave the staff a warm smile. They glanced at her boarding pass, nodded quickly, and let her through. Behind her, a few other passengers chatted loudly about business deals, vacations, and social events. They carried themselves as if they owned the world, barely noticing her. As she stepped inside the jet, the interior sparkled with quiet luxury. The soft cream-colored seats looked more like armchairs from a five-star hotel. Golden lights glowed gently from the ceiling, and the air smelled faintly of fresh flowers. Everything about the jet spoke of wealth and class. She chose a seat near the window and placed her bag carefully beside her. She looked outside at the runway, enjoying the peace before takeoff. But peace never lasts long when pride and prejudice are in the air. The lead flight attendant walked down the aisle with her chin lifted high. She was a woman who took pride in her position, believing she held authority over the passengers until the plane landed. Her uniform was perfectly ironed, her hair tied tightly in a bun, and her shoes clicked sharply against the floor as she walked. She noticed the black woman sitting quietly by the window. Something about her presence seemed to bother the attendant. Instead of offering a polite greeting, she gave a brief nod and moved on. The air inside the cabin felt different now. What had begun as a simple flight had turned into something unforgettable. Every passenger sat quietly, thinking about the words the woman had spoken and the truth she had revealed. The engines still hummed steadily as the jet moved across the sky, but inside, the atmosphere was heavy with guilt, shame, and reflection. The plane descended slowly through the clouds, the city lights below growing brighter as the evening drew near. The passengers sat quietly in their seats, their hearts heavy with reflection. None of them could forget the shocking events that had taken place in the sky. What started as a simple journey had turned into a lesson they would carry forever. The billionaire woman, sitting by the window, remained calm. Her eyes rested on the view outside, where the fading sunlight painted the horizon in soft gold and pink. Though her cheek still carried the faint memory of the slap, her spirit was stronger than ever. She knew the moment of truth had changed not just her, but everyone around her. When the jet touched down smoothly, a quiet sigh of relief spread through the cabin. But the relief was not only about the landing, it was about finally facing what would come next. The captain's voice filled the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. We thank you for flying with us." His tone carried more weight than usual, as if he too knew this flight was unlike any other. The woman stood slowly once the plane stopped. Every eye followed her. She walked gracefully toward the front, her steps steady, her head held high. The co-pilot came forward immediately, holding the written report in his hand. "It's ready, ma'am," he said respectfully. "Thank you," she replied with a calm nod. The lead flight attendant stood to the side, her uniform still neat but her face pale and full of fear. She had avoided eye contact the entire time since the truth was revealed, but now she had no choice. She stepped forward and whispered, "I am deeply sorry." The billionaire looked at her, her expression calm but firm. "Sorry can heal words," she said gently, "but it does not erase actions. What happened today will not be forgotten." But perhaps it can be forgiven in time, if you choose to truly change. The attendant's lips trembled. She bowed her head, knowing her career with this airline was over. The passengers slowly stood as well. One by one, they approached the woman. The businessman who had once whispered judgments said, "I will never forget this day. You showed us dignity greater than any wealth." The wealthy couple added softly, "We judged too quickly. Please forgive our blindness." The woman smiled gently at them. "The fact that you recognize it now is what matters. May this lesson stay with you longer than this flight." She then turned to the younger attendant, who had shown her kindness during the ordeal. "What is your name?" she asked warmly. "Maria," the young woman replied nervously. "Maria," the billionaire repeated kindly. "You remembered humanity when others forgot. Never lose that. In this company, we need people like you. When I return to my office, I will make sure your kindness is remembered." Maria's eyes widened, and her face lit with gratitude. "Thank you, ma'am," she whispered, tears forming. The passengers felt a deep admiration now. They realized the true meaning of power was not in revenge or anger but in kindness, fairness, and justice. The woman had shown strength without raising her voice, had carried dignity even when humiliated, and had turned cruelty into an unforgettable lesson. As she stepped off the plane, the airport staff were already waiting. They bowed respectfully, recognizing her immediately. News of the incident had already traveled ahead, as the co-pilot had sent a message to headquarters. The board of the company, her own employees, were alerted. She walked calmly through the private terminal, her footsteps echoing softly. Her driver, waiting with the car outside, opened the door for her. But before entering, she turned back for one last glance at the plane. To the world, it was just another private jet. To her, it was a place where a painful moment had been transformed into a seed of wisdom. The next day, the story spread across the company. Every employee, from pilots to ground crew, heard about the billionaire owner who had been disrespected on her own plane and how she handled it with grace. It was not just gossip, it became a lesson. The management announced mandatory training for all employees on respect, equality, and dignity for passengers. It was clear the company would change, not out of fear but out of vision. Meanwhile, the flight attendant who had caused the scandal faced the board. She tried to defend herself, but the truth was too clear. The passengers' statements, the co-pilot's report, and even her own guilty silence told the story. She was dismissed from her position. Yet, the billionaire owner did not seek to destroy her completely. Instead, she left her with words, "Take this as a chance to rebuild yourself. If you learn from it, the lesson will not be wasted." For the passengers, the memory of the flight followed them long after they returned home. At business meetings, some recalled her calmness when faced with insult. At dinner tables, others told their families about the billionaire who had taught them what dignity truly meant. Even those who had once laughed or whispered about her began to change how they looked at people. The young attendant Maria, on the other hand, found her life transformed. Within weeks, she was promoted. The billionaire had remembered her kindness and made sure it was rewarded. Maria became a symbol in the company of what it meant to serve with respect, no matter who the passenger was. The billionaire herself, in her quiet office overlooking the city, sat one evening and reflected. She thought about how easy it would have been to respond with anger, to shout or demand instant punishment on the plane. But she had chosen a different path. By staying calm, she had not only defended her own dignity but also taught a room full of people a lesson they would never forget. She picked up her pen and opened her notebook again. She wrote, "Power is not in wealth. Power is in restraint. Power is in knowing when to speak and when to stay silent. Dignity is the crown no one can take away." She closed the notebook and smiled softly. The world outside her office buzzed with noise, cars, people, business. But inside her heart, there was peace. She had faced disrespect, but she had turned it into strength. She had faced cruelty, but she had answered with wisdom. And in doing so, she had reminded everyone, including herself, that true greatness is not about owning planes, buildings, or companies. True greatness is about owning yourself. And so, the story of that flight lived on, not as a tale of humiliation, but as a legend of dignity. Passengers who had been on board told it for years to come. Employees used it as a guide. And the billionaire woman, though she never sought fame for it, became known quietly as someone whose calmness could change hearts. Because sometimes, a slap can leave more than a mark on the skin, it can leave a lesson on the soul. And sometimes, the one who seems most ordinary turns out to be the one carrying the greatest strength of all. The billionaire woman leaned back into her seat, her face calm, her movements gentle. She had no need to raise her voice or demand apologies. The truth had already done its work. People who had once looked at her with suspicion now could not even meet her eyes. They were too busy remembering how they had judged her, how they had stayed silent when the flight attendant treated her poorly, and how their whispers had added to the disrespect. The lead flight attendant stood frozen near the service area, her face pale and her hands trembling slightly. She was struggling with emotions she had never felt before. Moments ago, she had thought herself in control, powerful because of her position in the cabin. But now she realized she had not only disrespected a passenger but the very woman who owned the plane, the company, and the future of her career. At last, the silence broke when the co-pilot stepped out of the cockpit. He had been informed of the situation by the younger attendant, who could no longer carry the burden quietly. He looked around the cabin, his expression serious, and then turned to the woman by the window. "Ma'am," he said respectfully, "I've been told what happened. Would you like me to make an official report right now?" The woman looked up at him, her eyes soft but firm. "Yes. Write down everything exactly as it happened. I do not want exaggeration, and I do not want excuses. Only the truth." The co-pilot nodded quickly and took out a notepad. He began asking questions in a clear voice, recording the details. The younger attendant explained what she had witnessed, trembling as she spoke. Passengers, one by one, confirmed the events. Some admitted their silence, while others expressed their regret for not stepping in sooner. The billionaire listened quietly, not interrupting. She wanted the record to be fair, not fueled by anger. She believed in justice, not revenge. Still, everyone could feel the weight of her authority. As the notes were being taken, the lead flight attendant finally broke her silence. Her voice shook, but pride still clung to her words. I lost my temper. I didn't know who you were. I thought you were." She stopped herself, realizing her next words would only reveal more of her prejudice. The woman looked at her steadily. "You thought I was less. That is enough." The flight attendant's lips trembled, and for the first time, she lowered her head. The passengers saw the fall of arrogance, the collapse of a false sense of superiority. The silence that followed was heavy, but it was also cleansing. The billionaire woman sighed softly. She turned her gaze toward the other passengers. "Many of you saw what happened. Some of you whispered, some of you stayed quiet, but none of you spoke up. I do not hold hatred in my heart, but I hope you understand this truth: silence in the face of disrespect is not neutral. It allows the wrong to grow." Her words touched them deeply. A businessman raised his hand slightly, like a school child seeking permission. I want to apologize," he said quietly. "I saw how you were treated and I didn't speak up. I judged you too quickly. I am ashamed." The woman nodded gently. "Your honesty now is worth more than silence then. Learn from it. That is enough." Others followed, offering apologies not because they wanted forgiveness but because their hearts were heavy. The wealthy couple who had whispered about her earlier lowered their heads and said softly, "We judged you by appearance. We see now how wrong we were." The woman accepted their words with grace. She did not gloat or take pleasure in their guilt. Instead, she spoke with calm wisdom. Remember, respect costs nothing. It should not wait until you know someone's wealth, title, or status. It should be given to every soul you meet. The cabin grew quieter once again. The lesson was sinking deeper into every heart. The flight attendant, still trembling, whispered finally, "Please, forgive me." Her pride was gone now, replaced with real fear and regret. The woman studied her carefully. She could see the fear in her eyes, but also the regret beginning to form. "Forgiveness is not mine to give alone," she said softly. "You must first learn to forgive yourself for what you allowed your heart to become. As for your career, that decision will not be made here in anger. It will be addressed with truth when we land." The attendant swallowed hard and nodded, unable to reply. Time passed slowly after that. The passengers sat with their thoughts. Some stared out of the windows at the endless blue sky, reflecting on their own lives. Some thought about times they had judged others too quickly. Some thought about moments they had stayed silent when they should have spoken up. The billionaire, though calm, was not unaffected. Her cheek still carried the faint mark of the slap, but her heart carried no bitterness. She thought about her journey in life, the struggles of her youth, the prejudice she had faced, and the long road she had walked to become who she was today. This moment on the plane was not new to her. She had faced disrespect before. But today was different, because today she chose to make it a lesson for everyone watching. The younger attendant approached again, this time with a blanket. "Ma'am, would you like this?" she asked timidly. The woman smiled warmly and accepted it. "Thank you. Small acts of kindness are never forgotten." The young attendant blushed slightly and stepped back. She, too, was learning that day. As the jet continued its journey, the billionaire opened a small notebook from her bag. She began to write quietly. Her pen moved gracefully across the page, her words flowing like water. She was not writing about anger or revenge. She was writing about dignity, respect, and humanity. For her, every painful moment in life had always become a seed for wisdom. She knew she would later share this story not to shame, but to inspire. The rest of the flight was calm, almost heavy with reflection. No one laughed loudly, no one bragged about money or power anymore. Instead, there was silence, thought, and respect. Even the air seemed different, softer, as though the plane itself carried the weight of the lesson. When the captain's voice finally came through the speakers to announce their arrival soon, the passengers sat straighter in their seats. Each one of them knew they were not leaving this flight the same way they had entered it. The billionaire closed her notebook, looked around the cabin, and gave a small smile. She had turned humiliation into wisdom, disrespect into a lesson. The passengers looked back at her with new eyes, not the eyes of judgment or doubt, but the eyes of respect. And though she knew the consequences for the flight attendant would be serious, she also knew this moment would live forever in the hearts of everyone present. It was not only about her being a billionaire, but about the truth that dignity belongs to all. The jet floated high above the clouds, moving smoothly across the sky. The cabin was filled with quiet chatter, clinking glasses, and the faint smell of freshly brewed coffee. Some passengers leaned back in their soft leather seats, enjoying the comfort, while others were busy talking about money, power, and plans waiting for them when they landed. For many, this was just another luxurious flight. For one woman sitting by the window, it was becoming a test of patience and dignity. The cabin was frozen in silence. The sharp sound of the slap still echoed in the minds of everyone sitting inside. Passengers sat stiff in their seats, their eyes wide and their mouths slightly open. Some shifted uncomfortably, others looked down at their laps, not wanting to be caught staring. The flight attendant stood tall with her arms crossed, her face a mask of stubborn pride, though deep inside she already knew she had crossed a dangerous line. The woman by the window did not speak right away. She placed her hand lightly on her cheek, feeling the sting but refusing to let pain show on her face. Her dignity stood unshaken. Instead of reacting with anger, she drew in a slow breath, closed her eyes for a moment, and then opened them with calm resolve. The atmosphere around her changed instantly. Though she said nothing, her silence carried a weight that was heavier than any words. Everyone was waiting for her to break down, to cry, or to argue. But she did none of that. Instead, she straightened her shoulders and walked slowly back to her seat. Each step was measured, steady, as though she carried not shame but authority. She sat down, picked up the cup of tea she had been served earlier, and sipped from it gracefully. That simple act of calmness confused the flight attendant more than anything else. Whispers spread again. A man leaned to his companion. "She's too calm. That's not normal. Who is she really?" His companion nodded. "I don't know, but she doesn't act like an ordinary passenger. There's something about her." The tension grew unbearable. Finally, one of the other attendants, younger and more nervous, approached the woman softly. "Ma'am, are you all right? Do you need any medical assistance?" The woman looked at her and gave a small smile. "Thank you for asking. I'm fine." Her voice was steady, almost regal. Then she added in a tone that made the young attendant blink, "But I think it's time the truth is spoken." She stood again, but this time there was something different in the way she moved. She no longer looked like the quiet, ordinary traveler who had boarded hours earlier. She carried herself with the confidence of someone who had led boardrooms, commanded respect, and built empires. The passengers felt it immediately. Some leaned forward in their seats, sensing something about to unfold. She reached into her handbag and pulled out a small leather folder. Inside were identification cards, business documents, and a gold-embossed ownership certificate. She held them firmly in her hand, but instead of showing them right away, she began to speak. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said softly, but her voice carried through the cabin. "I remain silent because sometimes silence teaches us more than words ever can. But since silence has been mistaken for weakness, let me tell you who I am." The room grew even quieter. The hum of the engines filled the pause. The flight attendant who had slapped her stood frozen, her eyes narrowing, her throat dry. The woman continued, her voice calm yet strong. "This plane you are sitting in, it belongs to me. Not just this aircraft, but the company that owns it. I am the founder, the investor, and the owner of this airline." Gasps filled the room. The wealthy couple exchanged shocked glances. The businessman who had laughed earlier dropped his glass on the tray, spilling wine on his shirt without noticing. Even the young attendant who had shown kindness stepped back, her eyes wide. The lead flight attendant felt her knees weaken. She tried to force a laugh. "That's not possible, You're saying you own this company?" The woman opened her folder and held up the documents for everyone to see. The golden seal shimmered under the cabin lights. Her name was printed clearly on the ownership papers. "I don't need to prove myself to anyone," she said firmly. "But since respect seems to be tied only to titles, here is the truth. I built this empire from the ground up. While some people judge by appearance, I judge by character. And today, character has been tested." The silence that followed was heavier than before. Passengers shifted uncomfortably, their earlier whispers now replaced with guilt. Some lowered their eyes, ashamed of the things they had assumed about her. The young attendant looked as though she might cry, realizing she had witnessed something much larger than just rudeness. The billionaire woman turned her gaze slowly toward the flight attendant who had slapped her. The attendant's face had drained of color. Her lips trembled, but pride still tried to hold her up. I didn't know," she stammered. "That," the woman replied gently, "is the point. You didn't know. Yet you chose to treat me with cruelty. Respect should not depend on knowing who someone is. It should be given to every human being, no matter what they wear, what they look like, or where they come from." The words sank deep into the room. A few passengers nodded silently, ashamed of their earlier judgments. Others avoided her eyes, unable to face the truth she spoke. The woman did not raise her voice, nor did she insult anyone. Her calmness was like a mirror, showing everyone their own reflection. The wealthy businessman who had whispered rude comments earlier felt a deep burn of embarrassment. The couple who had laughed now held their heads low. Even the young attendant, though innocent of cruelty, felt the lesson in her heart. The flight attendant who had slapped her tried to speak again. I only thought you thought wrong," the woman interrupted firmly, though not harshly. "You thought my skin, my quietness, or my appearance meant I did not belong here. You thought you had the right to treat me less. But now you know that I not only belong here, I own here." Gasps rippled again, but this time no one doubted her words. She then turned to the other passengers. "All of you witnessed this. Some of you spoke whispers, some of you stayed silent. I don't blame you. Fear often keeps people quiet. But silence in the face of disrespect allows it to grow. The next time you see someone treated unfairly, remember what happened today. Remember that dignity has no price tag." The cabin felt different now. It was no longer just a flight. It was a lesson carved into memory. Every passenger knew they would never forget this day. The woman returned to her seat with elegance, placing her folder back in her bag. She looked outside the window at the endless clouds, her face calm again. She had revealed only what was necessary, not to humiliate, but to teach. The lead flight attendant stood frozen, her heart pounding. She wanted to apologize, but the words stuck in her throat. For the first time, she felt the weight of her actions. The passengers whispered again, but this time their words were filled with awe. "She's the owner," one murmured. "And she stayed so calm, even after all that." Another said quietly, "I will never forget this moment." The woman by the window closed her eyes, not for rest but for peace. She knew the journey had shifted. The truth was out, and with it came a wave of silence, shame, and respect. For the rest of the flight, no one dared to treat her as less. They all sat with heavy thoughts, each replaying their own role in the scene that had just unfolded. The lesson had been delivered, and its echo would stay long after the plane landed. She had remained calm in part one of the journey, ignoring the small signs of disrespect. But as the hours passed, the behavior of the lead flight attendant grew sharper. Every glance she gave carried an unspoken message: "You don't belong here." Her voice, when directed at the woman, sounded clipped, lacking the warmth that flowed easily toward other passengers. At first, the woman brushed it off. She had faced bigger insults in life and had risen far above them. She had no desire to argue on a plane filled with strangers. Yet, deep inside, she felt the tension growing. She wondered why people always judged so quickly. Did a calm appearance or quiet manners mean weakness? Did the color of her skin or her simple way of dressing make her less worthy in their eyes? She sipped her water slowly, refusing to give them the reaction they might be expecting. But arrogance has a way of pushing further when it is not checked. It began with a meal service. The attendants rolled out a cart filled with trays of food prepared specially for the passengers. Each tray carried neatly plated dishes, shining cutlery, and folded napkins. The lead flight attendant smiled at a wealthy couple and leaned down politely to place their trays. She laughed at a businessman's joke and even bent the rules to bring him an extra dessert. But when she reached the quiet woman by the window, her expression changed. "What do you want to eat?" she asked flatly, as if the question were a burden. The woman kept her tone kind. "I'll have the chicken, please." The attendant placed the tray down with a sharp motion, the silver fork sliding and clattering against the plate. The other passengers noticed but pretended not to. The woman gave a gentle smile anyway and said, "Thank you." The attendant's lips pressed into a thin line. She turned quickly and walked away, her shoes clicking louder than usual, almost as if she wanted her annoyance to echo. The woman took a small breath. She reminded herself that true strength lay in patience. Still, she could not deny that every action, every word, was meant to show her she was not respected. As the meal went on, whispers began to spread among the passengers. A man in a navy blue jacket leaned toward his neighbor and whispered, "Why does she even get to sit here? She looks too ordinary." Another replied, "Maybe she's with someone important. Otherwise, how could she afford this ticket?" Their voices weren't loud, but the woman heard them. Her heart ached, not for herself but for the world. Why was respect tied to appearance and assumption? Why did people need proof of wealth before they offered kindness? She pushed the thoughts aside and focused on her food. She knew the truth: silence often speaks louder than anger. But silence was not enough for the flight attendant. Later in the flight, passengers were offered more drinks. The woman, feeling a little thirsty, politely pressed the call button. The light above her seat blinked. A few minutes passed before the attendant came over. She didn't hide her annoyance this time. "Yes," she asked sharply. "Could I have some tea, please?" the woman requested softly. The attendant rolled her eyes before answering. "You already had water. Others are waiting too." The woman tilted her head slightly. "If it's not too much trouble." With a deep sigh, the attendant walked away and returned with a cup. She placed it down so roughly that a little tea spilled onto the tray. Some passengers gasped quietly. It was clear the treatment was not equal. But still, the woman only whispered, "Thank you," and took a napkin to wipe the spill herself. Her calmness seemed to fuel the attendant's irritation even more. People like her could not understand how someone could stay composed when insulted. They mistook dignity for weakness. As the flight continued, the tension grew heavier. The passengers had noticed enough to start forming opinions. Some watched quietly, afraid to speak up. Others secretly enjoyed the drama, curious to see how far it would go. The atmosphere was no longer one of peace but of waiting for something to break. And soon, it did. The moment came when the woman stood up to stretch her legs. She walked slowly toward the aisle, careful not to disturb anyone. As she moved, she accidentally brushed against the edge of the cart parked nearby. The flight attendant immediately turned, her eyes flashing. "Be careful," she snapped. "You nearly knocked that over." The woman stopped and turned politely. "I'm sorry, it was not my intention." But the attendant, carried away by her own pride, stepped closer. Her voice grew louder, sharp enough for everyone to hear. "Passengers like you need to know their place. This is not a bus or a train. This is a private jet." Gasps spread through the cabin. The words cut through the air like a knife. The passengers exchanged nervous glances. Some lowered their eyes, embarrassed. The woman's calmness didn't break. She stood still, her hands resting gently by her sides. She did not argue, did not shout back. She simply met the attendant's eyes with quiet strength. But the attendant mistook silence again. Her temper, unchecked for too long, burst. In one shocking moment, she raised her hand and struck the woman across the cheek. The sound echoed in the cabin. The room froze. Passengers gasped loudly, some covering their mouths in disbelief. The businessman who had been bragging minutes earlier fell silent, his eyes wide with shock. The wealthy couple clutched each other's hands, staring. The woman did not move. Her cheek stung, but her dignity stood taller than ever. She slowly lifted her chin and looked around the cabin. Every eye was on her. The silence was so deep that even the hum of the engines seemed louder than before. The flight attendant realized too late what she had done. Her face went pale, but pride kept her from apologizing. She crossed her arms and muttered, "You should know better." The passengers whispered now, louder than before. Some murmured, "That's too far." Others said, "She didn't deserve that." Still, no one stood up to defend her. Fear of authority, or maybe fear of losing their place, kept them glued to their seats. But the woman by the window was not shaken. Her calm eyes scanned the cabin once more, and for the first time, she allowed herself a small, knowing smile. She had seen enough. The mask of patience had done its work. She knew it was time to reveal who she truly was. The moment of truth had arrived. The woman by the window did not mind. She had seen such attitudes before. Life had taught her patience, and she believed people revealed themselves through their actions. Still, the small signs of disrespect were clear. When other passengers requested drinks, they were greeted with cheerful smiles and quick service. But when she asked politely for a glass of water before takeoff, the flight attendant acted as if she had not heard her. She repeated softly, "Excuse me, may I have some water?" The attendant finally turned with a sigh. "We will serve once we are in the air," she said, her voice cold. She walked away quickly without even making eye contact. The woman sighed quietly, not in anger but in sadness. She had built a life where she owned more than anyone around her could imagine. Yet in this simple moment, she was treated as if she were less important than the others. She did not reply or argue. Instead, she leaned back in her seat and reminded herself that dignity was never lost, no matter how others treated you. As the passengers settled in, some of them glanced at her with curiosity. A man in a grey suit whispered to his companion, "I wonder who she is. Doesn't look like the usual type of traveler here." His companion chuckled softly, "Maybe an assistant to someone important. She doesn't look like she belongs in this circle." Their words, though whispered, carried far enough for her to hear. She kept her face calm, pretending not to notice. She was used to assumptions. People often judged by appearance, forgetting that true power rarely announces itself loudly. Soon the captain's voice came through the speakers, welcoming everyone on board and announcing the smooth weather for the journey. The plane began to move, engines roaring softly, and the passengers held onto their seats as the jet lifted into the sky. Once the flight was stable, the attendants began their service. Trays of drinks were brought out, and passengers were offered choices with polite voices. When the woman requested something again, the same attendant returned with the same coldness. She placed the glass of water down with a little too much force, as if to make a point. "Here," she said, without a smile. The woman nodded politely. "Thank you." Her voice carried grace, even though she could sense the lack of respect in every word spoken to her. The hours passed, and the passengers enjoyed their meals and conversations. Some discussed luxury resorts, others bragged about business meetings. The woman listened quietly, sipping her water, lost in her own thoughts. She remembered the long journey that had brought her here, the sacrifices, the struggles, the late nights building her empire when no one believed she could. People had doubted her since the beginning, but she had turned doubt into determination. Now she was one of the wealthiest women in the world, the proud owner of companies that shaped industries, and, unknown to everyone on board, the very jet they were sitting in was hers. She looked around the cabin and studied the faces of those who judged her so quickly. Some of them would probably have changed their tone if they knew the truth. But she had no desire to reveal it yet. She preferred silence, letting people show who they really were when they thought no one important was watching. The flight attendant returned to check on passengers again, smiling at a wealthy couple, laughing with a businessman, but giving the woman by the window only a glance. This time, the glance was sharper, almost filled with suspicion, as if she were watching someone who did not belong. The woman straightened in her seat and met the attendant's eyes for a moment. There was no anger in her gaze, only quiet strength. It was the kind of strength that came from years of facing challenges and rising above them. She had nothing to prove to anyone. Her life, her work, her success, these already spoke louder than any words. Still, the cabin felt tense, like a storm waiting to break. The smallest things carried weight. A raised eyebrow here, a sharp tone there, each adding to the growing pressure. The passengers around her whispered now and then, some glancing at her as if waiting for her to react. But she never did. She stayed calm, refusing to lower herself to the level of those who disrespected her. In her heart, she knew something was building. She could sense that the arrogance of the flight attendant would not stop at small acts of rudeness. Pride often pushed people too far, and she wondered just how far this one might go. But whatever happened, she was ready. She had faced far greater battles in her life. The jet flew smoothly across the sky, the engines humming like a soft song. Passengers laughed, glasses clinked, and conversations filled the air. But under it all, an invisible tension rested like a shadow in the cabin. The woman by the window gazed out at the clouds, her mind calm but alert. She did not yet know how much the flight would change in the hours to come, nor how many lessons would be learned by everyone on board. But deep inside, she knew one truth with certainty: dignity, once held firmly, could never be taken away.